station. This is Houston. Are you ready for the event?
Hello, Houston. This is the station. Ready for the event.
Time 100 talks. This is Mission Control Houston. Please call station for a voice check.
Station, this is Time. How do you hear me?
Hello, Time. Welcome aboard the International Space Station. I hear you loud and clear. Great to be with you today.
Thank you so much for having us. It's great to be here. And Chris, I just want to get right into some of our questions. This is your third time in space, your third rotation through the ISS. That's time enough for space to maybe have lost a little of its novelty, for it to feel a little bit more like a job. But do you ever get past what astronauts call the overview effect? That sense of looking down at the Earth and seeing its wonderful beauty and destructibility.
Well, that's is certainly an effect that we have. I'll tell you though that it does, like with any job, I'm sure it does sometimes feel like a job. The difference is you have to you check yourself periodically as you float by the window and see the beautiful planet below you that you described. And I'm sure sports figures, when they walk out onto the field, sometimes forget that, think of it as a job and forget about how lucky they are to be playing at that level. And it's the same for us. This morning I was knee deep in bags unloading a cargo ship, and I was passed by the cupola window and did exactly that. Realized how lucky am I to be orbiting our planet and have this amazing view right now. Pretty special.
Special indeed. The space station has now been continually occupied for 20 years or a bit more, and yet, strangely, if you ask the American public, a lot of people aren't aware of that very fact, and they're also not aware of some of the good science, the great science that's come out of the ISS. What do you think is responsible for that public disconnect?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about, and I would argue that there's probably not a lot of public knowledge about laboratories on Earth that are producing great science as well. So scientific output is unfortunately just not on the forefront of people's minds as they go about their daily life and doing their job or their school or whatever the people are doing. And when there's a breakthrough in technology, a breakthrough in scientific knowledge, that gets attention at a world-class laboratory on Earth, just like it would up here. And then flying in space for 20 years, maybe it's come to seem routine and then it's not risky. Well, I'll tell you, space flight is challenging. Every day we're here is a difficult day to manage, both for the ground and the crew. And but maybe that's a good thing that we have got to the point where we've got our hands around that difficulty, and we're able to make it where it does seem like space flight is routine, just like flying an aircraft from New York to LA, for example.
Sure, and in some ways that's a good thing if people begin to accept it as simply a routine part of life. In another direction, back in the 60s, the space program commanded about 4% of the national budget, which is a considerable amount of money. Now it's about 0.4%, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of public support for spending yet more on space. Why do you think that? Has America fallen out of love with the fascination and the thrill of space travel?
You know, one of the cool things about being an astronaut is we get to travel around the country when we're not in space, and it's not 2020, and talk about space and share thoughts with folks. And my personal observation is people have not lost interest in space exploration, both manned and unmanned. Space captures people's attention and imagination and excitement. What I think that the challenge, though, is back then in the 60s we were in a race, and again, people relate to things that people can relate to on their own personal life. And imagine you're running a road race and you're in a competition head to head with a few other runners, and you've got 3 or 4 laps to go around the track. You can put more effort on the table if you know that you're trying to beat a person or two. If you're just going out and jogging and there's not necessarily a race and you're just doing your daily exercise, you might not need to put forth so much effort. And in this case, my analogy, effort equates to the percentage of the budget and how much we're willing to throw in there. So I think that the space race that we had going on at the time was a huge part that allowed the nation's appetite to swallow the higher percentage of the budget.
Right, understood. One of the most exciting developments of the last few years is the Artemis program, the commitment to have American astronauts back on the moon by 2024. But that mission, the landing mission, is supposed to happen after just a single circumlunar mission with astronauts aboard. Now, back in the Apollo era, we had Apollos 7, 8, 9, and 10 that tested the command module and the lunar module in Earth orbit and in lunar orbit. Do you think it's a safe model this time to scrap all of those incremental steps and have one circumlunar flight and then go straight on the stick the landing flight?
Well, you bring up a good point. There's certainly more buy down in your risk. You have higher safety margins if you fly more test flights. More test flights equates to more dollars. So program managers, of which I'm not one, but program managers have really tough decisions to make, where you're weighing budget versus risk and timeline, and you've got a couple big knobs to turn, and they all impact each other. So would it be safer to fly more test flights? Absolutely, no question. There's no way anyone can argue that. The question then becomes, how few test flights can you accept and have risk that's tolerable? The one difference that comes to mind also is we as a nation have, and as a globe, have much more spaceflight experience under our belts now in 2020 than we did in late 1960s. So I think that goes a little bit into the equation as well. We fully understand, or we understand the technical side of it. Certainly there's unknowns with any endeavor, but so I think the decades of experience combined with just tough decisions on how to manage time, budget, and technical risk.
Right. Back then we were learning how to do it for the first time, and now we sort of know how to do it. There's that institutional memory. Shifting gears slightly to geopolitics, our biggest competitor in space right now is not the old Soviet Union. It's China. Would you be in favor of the U.S. collaborating with China and perhaps even collaborating within the partnership of the International Space Station? Do you think we're ready for that kind of work together?
Well, I can only answer your question from the crew perspective. I think if our nations got together and decided collectively to work in space together, I would open my arms wide open and say, come on in, taikonauts, let's go. Let's talk about how you execute your procedures, how we execute our procedures. This is how we do a burn, deorbit burn, for example. This is how we operate on the space station. I would think it would be super cool. One of the most memorable things for me about flying on board the International Space Station is the international cultural aspect of it on a person-to-person basis with my crewmates. Having other food, having other music, having other just political discussions, life discussions around the dinner table makes the 6 months just super memorable. Yeah, all the science we do and spacewalks we do and robotic operations are fantastic, and I love every minute of those. But in the end, when I'm an old guy and telling stories to my grandchildren, it'll probably be about the friendships I've made on the space station, and I think it would be cool to add one more country to that list.
Well, and we certainly saw that back when there were tensions between the U.S. and Russia with Ukraine and Crimea, and yet the astronauts aboard the ISS simply transcended that. They were all just crewmates working together. Geopolitics meant nothing.
Agree.
Some of the most thrilling work that's been carried out in space has been carried out by uncrewed, unmanned spacecraft. They're cheaper, they don't risk human life, and there is a school of thought that this is really the way to go. What do you say to folks who say, let's stop risking people and do all of our deep space missions robotically? How do you answer that argument?
Well, I think if you do 100% missions robotically, you're going to miss a key aspect, and that is how manned missions bring it up close and personal, and you really get a sense for living the mission through the astronaut's eyes, if you will. People can relate to people. It's difficult to relate to a robot driving around. You can, and it's exciting to think about a Mars rover and look at the camera views, and the new Mars rover will even have audio, and to hear sounds of the tires crushing gravel is super, super cool. But then to put on top of that a person's feelings. How did you feel when your feet were crushing the gravel and you bent over and you picked up that rock and you looked out and you saw the horizon on the moon or the Mars curvature of the surface? How did that make you feel? And though that's a key part. Now, how do you put a scientific value or worth on feelings? And that's kind of touchy-feely, and it doesn't really have a place in a line item on a budget. But I think that robotic and human manned missions are dovetailed in their success of one another. We need the robotic missions to have safe human missions, and it just works together. I think they go hand in hand.
I think you're absolutely right that there is no way to have a line item in a budget for human inspiration. There's just no way of putting a price tag on that. One other direction I wanted to go. Space tourism certainly is, a very big market right now, or there certainly is talk of developing a very big market in space tourism. And while it's wonderful to think of space hotels and even suborbital flights, the physics of space travel don't change. It is still pretty punishing to tolerate the speeds and the G-forces of going up and coming down. Do you think that average people who may have the money for a space tourism experience can withstand the kind of G-forces and physics that you folks, trained astronauts, have spent hours and hours and hours in centrifuges and planes trying to acclimate yourself to?
Well, I mean, is there some portion of the population out there that it's not suited for? Yeah, absolutely. But I do think that as sometime in the future, and who knows how many years or decades away that is, it will be something that people can throw a credit card down and buy a ticket, and maybe you just have a small checkout that you have to do, kind of like if you're going to go be a scuba diver. You can do a couple of lessons in your local swimming pool with your dive master and get a card, and now you're certified to go off and dive in the ocean or wherever you want to take it. And so there's probably some type of regulation that goes into it. I'm sure we wouldn't want to just completely open it to anybody, because as you correctly identify, you are subjecting your body to the G-forces going up and the G-forces coming back. And those are not insignificant, but it's something that is very doable. We're just normal people. We happen to be doing this as a profession, but our bodies are no different than anyone else's. And The only difference is we get seen and get a healthy upcheck from our flight surgeons before we strap onto the rocket, and I foresee that some kind of hybrid thing like that being the case.
We hear a lot of talk these days about the financial possibilities in lunar mining, but getting material to and from the lunar surface can be awfully expensive. I mean, just putting a pound of payload into low Earth orbit can cost $10,000. Do you think lunar mining will ever be realistic, or that future moon bases will instead be more like Antarctic bases, just fixed research institutions in a very rugged environment?
Yeah, this is a little bit beyond my subject matter expertise, but my personal feeling is that it'll be very difficult to ever completely sever the umbilical cord from Earth to a lunar outpost. Do I think that lunar mining is realistic? Yeah. Do I think that it'll supply every single bit of consumables that people or a group of people need? Probably not. So they'll need some sort of logistics and resupply, and the more we can fine-tune our ability to use the in situ resources on the lunar surface, of course, the better off we are, because it brings down the cost of the mission. But it's definitely a challenging proposition.
Now, NASA is very committed not just to returning astronauts to the moon, but to the Moon to Mars program. As far back as 1969, after Apollo 11 landed, a crewed landing on Mars was considered about 15 years in the future. And at any given point since then, Mars has always been 15 years in the future. That's where we are right now. The best bet is that sometime in the mid-2030s, we'll be able to have astronauts on Mars. What do you think about that? When do you think we will actually see boots on the red planet?
Well, I'm going to be a little bit creative and say it's not 15 years away. It's 20. No, I'm kind of being facetious in there and a little bit of a joke, but it's hard. It's difficult, and it all boils down. Again, this is just my personal opinion about life, but anything technical is solvable, and that the time scale in which you solve that is just about resources and how much. We have a ton of smart people in the world, and if you put all those smart people and unlimited resources on it, we could be on the moon faster than 15 years. Now, there's still some technologies out there that'll help us greatly, and that's different types of propulsion systems that can get us there quicker and that sort of thing, and figuring out the landing and the habitat. So there's stuff that has to be built, and building stuff takes time. So there's a certain number of years that once you say, ready, set, go, here's a pile of resources, here's a pile of people, it's still going to take like a decade, I think, from that point. And so it boils down to resources and money and funding and will. But I think that's why you have this kind of constant 15-year sliding scale, because if today they said, ready, set, go, 15 years is a nice, reasonable number that you can make it happen. So given the fact that coronavirus has just kind of turned our world upside down and our financial markets upside down, I'm going to say we just bought 20 years instead of 15.
And one final quick question. The Cygnus cargo vehicle that just arrived at the station is carrying a 3D virtual reality camera that will help humans on Earth experience a spacewalk in VR. Now, there are only a couple hundred people who have ever had that transcendent experience of walking in space. What do you think the value is of allowing people on Earth to see what you folks see when you are actually outside your spacecraft?
Well, I think that people need to know that spacewalks are hard, and spacewalks are my favorite thing to do. I love them, but it's a challenging day. It's a hard day for the crew, for the technicians, for the engineers, and it's difficult even with the most intricate camera system that you have. We had the luxury of some HD little mini cameras out there with us this last spacewalk, Bob and I, and those are fantastic images. But what they don't convey, and it's really, really hard to convey, is the blackness of space, the brightness of Earth, the contrast between the two. What does it look like to see 250 miles below you, passing by at 5 miles a second? And oh, by the way, the shiny metal thing that you have in your hand that has serial number 0001, there's only one of them. Don't screw that thing up, because if you screw it up, that whole part of the expedition is ruined. So it's hard to lump all that up into a snowball and throw it in someone's face, but I'm excited for cool cameras to try.
That sounds fantastic. I want to thank you so much for the time you've given us today. I know your schedule is impossibly busy, and safe travels. Come home to us soon. We look forward to welcoming you back on Earth.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed your thought-provoking questions. Have a great day.
You too.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes our event as we count down to 20 continuous years of humans living and working on the International Space Station.
Thank you to all participants from Time 100 Talks Station. We are now resuming operational audio communications.
Hi! Want to get some amazing games